Hello and welcome to the Tiffany Marie Brannon Show. I'm Tiffany Marie Brannon, and today we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Robert Morss. He is a former Ranger, a high school history teacher. He went to Penn State, and you might know him as a January Sixer who was completely and, wrongly imprisoned and pardoned by President Trump last year, right? Last year?
Last year.
2026 is freaking me out. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to talk about. And yeah, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, Tiffany. And yeah, I'm honored to be here. We have a lot to cover, not just about our day, but just about everything that we've been
Yeah.
going through for the last like 5, 6 years.
Yeah, genuinely. One of the reasons why I was so excited that we connected and why I was really happy that you could make it the show was because we could talk about and we will talk about a lot of what's going on politically in our nation and what you've been through. I mean, the journey and the trials and tribulations that you have come out the other end just recently from. But also, I think so much of who you are is founded in your faith, and that is really important to me, and that's something that I think a lot of people probably haven't gotten to hear from you about, and, like, maybe how your faith also carried you, so, do you kinda wanna share people a little bit about your background and history and, pre-January 6th, like,
Yeah,
that life, and then when everything kinda changed?
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So, long story short, I'm just a kid from Reno. I was born and raised, out west. And at the age of 17, I moved from Reno, Nevada, and walked away from Lake Tahoe and all the freedom of out west to join the army. I became a ranger in 2nd Ranger Battalion, deployed to Afghanistan 3 times. But it was on my first trip to Afghanistan when I observed the wasteland of Afghanistan that would follow me home to America if the next generation didn't keep this republic. Now, I've made that statement a lot, but I think that it can become a platitude if it's not focused on to a degree. So, since you gave me the invitation, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that.
Please do, it's what we're here for.
Yeah, in Afghanistan, yes, it's bombed out. Yes, it's a wasteland. Yes, it's very difficult over there, but there's a reason for that, and it's because the individuals that occupy that part of the world have no idea what individual sovereignty means. Not just the definition of it, but the conceptualization of it. Like what do you mean I can do whatever I want and pursue my happiness and have private property and also my life is my own? These are very Western ideas, and these are ideas that are extinct in the East. And so, to try to communicate this or to even fight a prolonged war in order to teach a group of people that for thousands of years have not operated under this way of thinking and then bless it to them through our money and our blood and then expect them to, maintain it, talking about the Iraq war here is not a good idea. It took thousands of years for the Western mind to want freedom and then to understand how to maintain it and how to pursue it. And so, when I mean that the wasteland of Afghanistan was going to follow me home to America, that's what I'm talking about. Not just that, it's going to look like Detroit because, every city that's ran by a Democrat looks like garbage, and
Yeah.
that's their trademark. Hiroshima and Nagasaki look better than Chicago right now, which is
Isn't
crazy,
that crazy?
dude.
It's
And they
crazy.
got
They were
Houston
obliterated. They
got
were
hit
literally
by an atomic bomb
on an
and
atomic level, pulverized, and yet
pulverized.
are these gleaming, shining cities
Yeah. And
compared.
Democrats are worse.
Man, and did you see the before and after that was going viral recently on social media of South Africa? Like Pretoria before, Pretoria after, before they kicked all the white people out and took over the government, after, and it's just like it looks like a third world country now. And it's the
Right.
same thing. It's the concept of collectivism versus individualism, and people
Yes.
forget that we can talk about collectivism and individualism as political ideologies all day long, which they are, but politics are always downstream and a symptom of
Yeah.
faith or ideologies that are deeper philosophically. So I mean, there's a reason why Christianity is individual, promotes individualization and individualism versus stuff like Buddhism or really Islam, and all these promote this massive collectivist idea that trickles down into socialism, which is why all these crazy, white girls from Mamdani socialist nut jobs are like, all for Sharia law and
Yeah.
all the Muslims, and you're like, "Whoa, what? Make it make sense. Please make it
Well,
make sense."
I'll try to make it make sense right now. Is those ways of thinking require less brain power and foresight in order to follow through with. If
Wow.
all you can imagine is what you're going to have within the next week because someone else is going to provide it, that requires less responsibility, that requires less discipline, that requires less faith. And so there's an actual conditioning that takes place where, okay, if I know that my master is going to feed me every night at 5 p.m., then I don't need to worry about finding my own source of food. And so, what I talk about in one of my first books that we actually wrote while we were in prison and had smuggled out of prison. Yeah, it's
No
called One
way.
Question Remains. Yeah. If you go on Amazon right now and type in One Question Remains, it's going to be the only book on your bookshelf that was smuggled out of American prison.
I feel like we're
Yeah.
talking Apostle Paul level, like Bonhoeffer level, writing in jail, smuggling out as like, that's incredible. Wow.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of weird that that's my life too. But
Whoever said you can't be productive while you're in prison?
and we were going to get to that, because there's a phrase that says, do the time and don't let the time do you, which is
Mm.
absolutely what I decided to do. But the point that I was getting to is that there is an active catalyzation taking place of the American, where we become beasts of burden because it's simpler and also more complicated to be, an individual, forward thinking, person who wants to seize the day. And so it's happening from both sides. And Democracy in America explains how the future of this country is going to divulge into a system where the government gently inhibits any kind of progress. And we're experiencing that. But behind us, we have an extraordinary, alluring temptation of caving into the comforts and the flesh. And so you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place of, do I try hard and get my butt kicked here, or do I just lay back and let someone take care of it for me without any of my freedom? So that is what I tried to imply by saying that the wasteland of Afghanistan would follow me home. I then use my GI Bill, go to Penn State, become a high school history teacher because I knew that as a teacher I could make a difference in the classroom. And then, the year of 2020 is when the pandemic happened. That's when the vaccine mandates happened. That was my senior year of college. And I was kind of watching it all from my phone, and then they stole the election. And I'm like, dude, you know what? I swore an oath to protect the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. I wasn't fixing to do anything wild, but if the president is going to say, hey, man, I need you down there at the Capitol on January 6th, and not to throw him under the bus at all, but, never before has a president called upon the people to arrive somewhere. And so 2 weeks after I graduated from college, I did what I thought every American ought to do, which is protest the stolen election at our nation's capital using our First Amendment right. And little did I know that I was walking into a lobster trap that had been manufactured for the last 4 years to
What we
suck
know,
in
over 245, 47 undercover,
agents
agents were in,
at a
was it
bare
CIA
minimum.
or FBI?
FBI, but the CIA was definitely there as well.
So we know that for a
Um,
fact, and we now know as recently as this last month that Georgia, in fact, after having their voting records all finally exposed, there's some fraud there. What a
100%
shock. We
fraud,
were
which
right.
which also makes me think that Herschel Walker's election was 100% stolen too, because if they're going to steal it from Trump in 2020, they're going to steal it from him in 2022. So that needs to be re-examined as well. I don't want to let him, be forgotten in all this chaos. But Georgia, they're popping hot on the radar just like Minneapolis is, because deception does that, and
Yeah.
that's something that I learned while I was locked up. You cannot run from what you've done. And when you're locked in a box with 20 other men and there's a thief, give it a day. We'll find out who the thief is because someone's clothes aren't where they belong. And so it's only a matter of time. And that, again, that kind of feeds into that very, very short thinking process that we were discussing earlier. That when you think in your mind, I'm going to have this now because I need this now, but it requires me to steal from somebody, though I might have it now, it makes your situation 10 times worse. And so, again, socialism is theft. They would prefer theft as opposed to doing it themselves. And so, all this to say, I'm in prison now, and I'm in for the last, 3.5 years, and I did the time. I read the books that inspired our founding fathers to want to write our Constitution the way that it was. I
Wow.
studied Hobbes. I studied Plato, I studied Cicero, I studied Hooker, I studied Voltaire. I mean, I wanted to know what the Enlightenment was inspired by. I wanted to know where these ideas started to come from, and that's what I mean. The West has been trying for, a very long time to get this whole individualistic thought pattern down. And that's what's actually at stake. We are in an information war over essentially how the future is going to look in terms of who is going to see it and through what lens. Are cattle going to look at the future and say, I just want to look at my next lunch? Or are entrepreneurs and investors and heroes going to look at the future and say, I see the next hill we can conquer. I see the next frontier we can explore. And that's what's really under attack too. So there's a lot that can be said. And Christ and our religion plays a huge role in that. Our Constitution limits the tyranny of government, whereas the Bible limits the sin. And what Jesus Christ did on the cross is unleash the human potential so that we're not belabored with sin, we're not belabored with guilt and shame and fear. We can actually do the thing that God put us on this earth to do in the first place. And so our faith is part and parcel with our freedom. There should be no separation between church and state. And as a matter of fact, I'm not arguing on it on behalf of Islam because their whole state is ran by their religion. But I would argue that
No,
I
it
think that
100% is. I'm with you. It's evil, demonic, and yeah, I have no problem with so-called Islamophobia. There's no such thing as
yeah.
Islamophobia, they're just called common sense. That's the truth.
Yeah, and I was on an interview with Chris Burgard, who's working on something with General Mike Flynn, and I said on camera, I said that there is no such thing as a peaceful Muslim, only patient Muslims,
Or
and that's something that
uneducated Muslims, the people I know that don't think they're violent or that, what's written in the Quran is in the Quran, or just people that claim to be Muslim and have never actually sat down and read it. And I'm like, you do know what
right.
it says about Christians and Jews and women and how,
Oh
you
yeah,
can rape children. I mean, it's right there. Just
it's
open
right there.
read it, but they don't want to. They're ignorant, almost intentionally ignorant, I would say.
And I think that really is what it boils down to is that in a communist way of life, you can intentionally be ignorant. God has given us the power of strong mind and the spirit, excuse me, of a strong mind and of power and authority. And so it's actually antithetical to not have authority and not have a strong mind. It's actually a sin to be stupid. And you heard it
Yes.
here first, ladies and gentlemen. And so in a cult like Islam or in a cult like communism, they actually prey upon the satanic attitude, which is, to be dumb, to sacrifice the gift of intelligence and autonomy and free will in order to just be a part of the state, to be another, gray matter. You essentially sell your soul through, microscopic decisions along the way to serfdom. And that's where we're headed. That's what's at stake. And that's why podcasts like this are important because even if it touches one life, so they can sit back and think, maybe I ought to do read a book, or maybe I should really go home and rethink my life. That's the point, and
Yeah.
it's a wrestling match. Yes, against powers of evil and heavenly realms and principalities, but there are people that are alive today that would prefer that you and I haven't read the books that we've read, that do not know the language that we know, and do not have faith in the God that we trust, so that it's easier to control us. And that's why the Christians are persecuted. That's why our books are burned. And that's why our education system is under attack. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be a teacher in the first place. I didn't mind being the lone Republican in the school system. I did not mind. I've been surrounded before, been outnumbered before, because I know that our cause is worth it. But at the end of the day, I'm realizing now too, and this is one of the reasons why I've started my production company, is that they made a mistake by locking me up. I'm
Mm.
going to do something that puts me in classrooms all across the country, if not the West. So they should have just left me alone in that humble high school classroom. They really should have, because now they've made a monster out of me.
It's like they
And
woke the like that World War II phrase when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, now they've awoken the sleeping
yes, the
dragon or
sleeping
whatever.
giant.
Yeah,
Sleeping. Well,
like
I was on stage at the gala that I hosted on January 9th, and I mentioned that everyone is familiar with the sleeping giant concept. I would rather introduce the notion of the poisoned giant into the American vernacular, where we are just as powerful as we were back in World War II. But because of how brainwashed we've become, how absolutely diluted our diet has become, our lack of sunlight, our lack of a common sense within, the classroom, but then also just everything that's on the television, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we consume is absolutely poisoned. the medication that we've been given, the vaccines that we've been given that are all designed to destroy us. And someone can hear all that and say, like, well, then what's the point of giving up? But then the counter offer to that would be, because that's when God can show off against all of those odds. That's when God can really show off. And then that's when salvation really becomes abundantly apparent. That's our only way out of this mess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, my dear friend Malcolm Guite, Dr. Malcolm Guite, he's a incredible poet, hopefully poet laureate of the UK one day, and he was a don at Cambridge. He's a priest, an Anglican priest, and he said to me this last summer, because we're both C.S. Lewis scholars, and he's,
Mere
brilliant.
Christianity should be required reading for everyone
Required
in
reading.
America.
Completely agree. Absolutely should be required reading. But I was having a really bad year this last year and was at this conference in Belfast, Ireland with the C.S. Lewis Foundation, which listeners, if you should do anything, it is go to one of the C.S. Lewis Foundation's retreats, support them. They are doing the Lord's work, spreading C.S. Lewis everywhere. But what he said really stuck with me. And because I was talking about like the consolation of philosophy by Boethius and dealing with, the idea of evil winning and like what is it when an evil man wins, and how Boethius kind of comes to the conclusion that he was a Christian in Roman times at the end of the Roman Empire under the last Osgoth emperor, and was really dealing with, he was wrongly convicted. He was framed by the Senate, who had been
There's a trend
there's
here.
a trend, a trend, and he was wrongly imprisoned and sentenced to death after being raised in, Roman aristocracy and serving his country and his empire faithfully for over 25 years. Not only that, but raising 2 sons, which also did that, which were very high up and had, really great titles, and just a virtuous man is what he was. He draws on some stoicism, but he was really a Christian, like a profoundly devout Christian. And in his writings at the end, he's sentenced to death. He's on an island and he knows he's going to die. And this is the last thing he ever wrote. And it's like, well, evil can never actually harm you, because when you are no longer living in the definition of what you were created to be, you become nothingness. So evil men cease to become or be men at all, because men are created in the image of God. And as that, we have certain natural, we fit in the order in a certain natural way that we were created to. And when we walk away from that, we become twisted creatures that are not really men. And so back to Malcolm Guite, this is kind
Interesting.
of, we were talking about this, about, losing your fundamental purpose that you were divinely created for, and when you step out of the created order of things, and dealing with evil, and dealing with in the last battle, the last book of the Chronicles of Narnia, we were talking about how that really, and you and I are both Christian, and we both talk about how it feels more and more like end times every day, and
Yeah.
you really kind of feel sometimes the walls closing in, and feeling closer and closer, and you look at all kind of the prophetic things, you're like, well, that happens, so what's next? What's the point, right? You have that question in the back of your mind. It's like, well, if you know that the bad guys are gonna win, like they did in the last battle in the Chronicles of Narnia, and you know that you see the Pevensie family, Lucy and Susan. I mean, Susan not really, but like you have Peter and the younger kids, and they're fighting the Calormenes, and they end up all dying at the end, and leaving Narnia and being the real Narnia, being in heaven. And sorry for those of you that never finished Chronicles of
Yeah,
Narnia.
huge spoiler
Spoiler,
alert right
spoiler.
there.
Yeah, everyone dies at the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, which no one I think really realizes that that the whole family dies. But Malcolm Guite said in this conversation we were having, he said, it doesn't matter that the right side wins. It doesn't. It doesn't matter that the right side wins. It matters that the right side's right. And that is what we need to remember in this war that we are fighting every day. And that's what I feel like you really held on to and came out of this with, is this, yeah, it can be discouraging looking up at, the mountain, at maybe the impossible odds, but that's when heroes are made. I'm sure David felt that way when he was looking at Goliath. I'm sure
Right.
that, I'm sure that there have been and will continue to be countless men and women in history that God has placed at a specific time and place that seems like impossible odds. But our life, where we are right now, who you and I are as American citizens alone, that was based and built on impossible odds.
Yeah.
With God, all things are possible. Even the most impossible, the most absurd is possible with God. And I think that's something that you have like so eloquently and, intentionally communicated. And I just really want to say thank you for that.
No.
So
Well, thank you very
it's
much. I
true.
also appreciate how well read you are. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm just a nerd. That's all I am.
Same here, man. Nerds gotta unite, man.
Wait, if you were as a really random, quick, off the topic kind of question, as a teacher and as someone that's read
Yeah.
all this stuff and's been through this, what would your like absolute reading requirements for American students be?
Oh, man. Well, I would definitely say C.S. Lewis is up there. But I was actually having a conversation with somebody recently, and I said, if I ever end up in any position of authority in politics, I'm gonna make my constituents have to watch the Lord of the Rings movies. Like they have to sit down and they have to write a book report, or they have to write the report, and then they have to watch it. And
Yeah.
granted, I know that there's like really weird Lord of the Rings nerds out there. Like I get that take it way too far.
Yeah.
But I they just got re-released into the theaters
Wait, did
after.
they really?
Yeah. They still might be out. You
I
might be
missed
lucky. I
this.
think they were re-released for a 25-year anniversary, and I went down. I've been to the theaters 3 times now by myself like a weirdo, but I went down there to those theaters, and I sat back in those chairs, and I remember like, dude, the last time I saw this in this setting, I was 8 years old, and I just kinda had a really wild experience where 25 years of my life have gone by, and realizing how much these movies played a huge role for a quarter of a century in the way that I think. And watching men do honorable deeds in the face of certain death, watching people say, I don't know the way, but I'm going to continue to tread in that right direction. I mean, it's just sprinkled throughout in such a really in depth, absorbing way. So
Yeah.
I would say that, though it's not a book, I would say that you'd have to sit down and watch those. When I have kids, that's gonna be a
Well, and they
mandatory.
can read the books too, so it could go
They
both
can
ways. But I
then,
mean I mean, that's
yes.
what Tolkien the whole reason why Lord of the Rings was published was because of C.S. Lewis, for those of you that don't know. Marked that
Yes.
manuscript down to the publishers. Tolkien based all that off of his experience in World War One and really defeating and surviving the horrific odds. And he was a devout believer, like Catholic. And so you look at how it's all like truth is truth. You
Yes.
can't alter truth. And you're right, that would inspire heroism an entire generation. And did you see that article that just came out this week on why Harry Potter no longer resonates with anyone? Because the same people, like our generation's Lord of the Rings became like the kids that were a little younger than us. That was their Harry Potter. Because
Right.
take like the idea of like witches and wizards out of it, and it's still a battle of good versus evil, right?
Yes.
They're saying now, and this is crazy, that it's too simplified and that it's too optimistic to think and believe that good could ever truly defeat evil, or that it's that black and white, and that they're really just good and bad and it's all gray and nuanced, and it's such garbage. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's just say. Okay, so Lord of the Rings, what else?
Yes, I would say Lord of the Rings is definitely key. Maybe if they're a little bit older, to sit them down and read Dostoevsky. I think Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov really important. At least they were for me. And then I really liked Napoleon Hill's Law of Success. That's where I learned that the law of retaliation. That's where I learned of how the thief actually only steals from himself, which kind of coincides with what we were talking about earlier. Really good stuff. Basically, anything Cicero put down, would be mandatory. But yeah, I there's a lot of different things. Again, bringing it back to the first part of our conversation that are under attack because lazy brains are attracted to lazy thinking. And if you can just say, oh, yeah, type something into this screen and it'll take you where you need to go, how
Yeah.
much effort is there in that as opposed to learning how to understand where the sun sets, where your landmarks are, look at a map and understand how to read that, And so, like, it's strange, we are under such mental suffocation from a comfortable blanket at this,
Oh, I love
and
that.
it's
Yes. I mean, I even think about going back when because I'm gonna really age myself right now, but we used to have to print out the MapQuest,
yeah,
directions, and,
yeah,
like
I
so, like,
remember
growing
that.
up, like, my passenger side floor was just filled with old MapQuest printouts because we didn't have GPS on our phones. We didn't have any of this stuff, and so what's really funny is, like, now I find it very odd because, like, I'm really because of that, I mean, my spatial awareness is very good. I mean, maybe not when I'm driving per se, because I'm not a good driver. But generally speaking, I know when I'm in a city, I know a city. I'm there, I can tell you exactly where we're going, which direction, what street crossovers, because I have that in my brain. That's a skill I acquired due to necessity. What's scaring me is that,
Interesting.
right, due to necessity. Now, these kids now, they can live and be from the same town, and they literally cannot get from point A to point B without a smartphone directing them in their car. That is terrifying. It is, I mean, kind of to what you were saying earlier, it's this brain rot that is intentional. The attention span of a human being is now lower than that of a goldfish, right? A goldfish has an 8-second attention span. We have a 7-second attention span. Our IQ is the lowest it's ever been recorded since we started recording it in 1971, I believe. And then on top of that, what you have is going back to this idea of laziness in society and kind of leeching off of others, and then having the people that are more exceptional having no motivation to actually do or achieve because 'cause they're just gonna be mooched off of. You go back to, where did socialism come from? Alright, everyone says, "Oh, Marxism." It's come like communism and socialism are the evil daughters of Marxism. Okay, sure, but who's their grandfathers? Who are the grandfathers of communism and socialism? Who is the proverbial father or fathers, who are the proverbial fathers of Karl Marx? And it's the utopian socialists, right? So it's Robert Owen and Charles Fourier, who, in Robert Owen's writing, right, they were the ones that really founded and created and wrote the manuscripts for socialism itself before Marx took it and made it more economic based theory. What you have is Robert Owen literally in his diary, he goes off about how it's these demons that are telling him what to say in his manuscripts. Demons are, he's practicing the occult, he's practicing Satanism. He's deeply into these like seances and, meeting with mediums and trying to communicate with demons. And then the demons tells him what to say. He's like, "Oh yeah, the demons told me to write this down today and how to, not only what to write, but then how to proliferate it, how to market it." They gave him a whole marketing plan, and the guy just writes about it like it's no big deal. And so it really truly is evil and
Yes.
satanic, and it's a crazy thing.
Undeniably so.
Undeniably, and it's a crazy thing to say in this day and age. People get really weird about talking about spirituality or the fact that there's an unseen realm all around us because
Yeah.
we work in such three-dimensional physical reality terms, but that's the truth, you know?
Is that the truth? I think it's also the design of, the rulers of this 3D plane to limit the awareness of the mass majority of the population to believe that this is it.
Yeah.
But I think that's the coolest thing about Jesus Christ is that the more you go into him and the more that you realize why he is the way, the truth, and the life, there's nothing more appealing to a human than realizing there's more, but wait, there's more. And so there's always more to Jesus. There's always more to our faith. And I think that's the one thing that we've got left that we can always utilize. And maybe it's the reason why we're in the time that we're in is to realize that if we're to weaponize the name of Christ against evil and study how the disciples and the saints spread our faith to a very pagan, very satanic group of people, you got to remember they're just humans, and humans are blessed and cursed with curiosity. And so if you can tempt, maybe not tempt, maybe offer, because God doesn't tempt, but offer to a human that's lost, hey, there's a better way to live. There's things that make sense that don't cost you your dignity or your pride, then perhaps maybe they'd be interested. And that's what I want to do with film. That's what I want to do with Lego Man Productions. And that's ultimately why I'm so focused on this. I'll tell you another good story that happened the day of my arrest.
Yes. Yeah, and
When
I wanna hear, like, sorry, we jumped ahead. We gotta go back. I wanna hear you tell the story, and then we have to hear what happened that day, and then fast forward to now.
Yes, yeah. So on the day of my arrest, the FBI entered my apartment. I was teaching high school in Pittsburgh, and they entered my apartment and they're passing all kinds of things in my house like, hunting gear or, weights or whatever. I also had some very dangerous objects like a constitution and a holy Bible,
No.
really
Well, locked
extremist
you
stuff,
up. I
man.
mean, no wonder you got arrested. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. And so, but I also did have in my possession a stockpile of Legos. Now, These were Legos that I brought into the classroom to help the students kind of chill out that, might have been dealing with ADHD or whatever. I also love Legos. I think they awaken the engineer in all of us. And if you've ever sat down with a pile of Legos and then really realized that, man, I can make whatever I want out of this pile of plastic, it's an addictive kind of
Yeah.
feeling. So we
But
have so much in common. This is
yeah.
wild. That's cool. Well, so yeah, so there's that. And then among those random Legos, the FBI finds the holy grail of January 6th, which is none other than a Lego model kit of the United States Capitol. Yeah. So now they're like, wait a second. Here's the United States Capitol in Lego form. He must have planned all of January 6th. Clearly, this is all the evidence we need. Let's put it in his court documents. Let's call him the architect of the insurrection. We got him, Your Honor. This is the guy responsible for January 6th. That happened.
You're kidding me.
I wish I was. So, like,
They
the
did
worst
that
Seinfeld
based on your
episode you've ever heard.
Legos?
Yes, yes, like the worst Seinfeld episode you ever seen in your life. They take the Legos, they frame me for setting this whole thing up, and the only time a judge ever said anything honorable throughout my, entire time as a political prisoner, when they bring this up to the judge, he asks, "How is this possible if the Legos are still in the box?" It was an unopened box of Legos that they try to frame me with the absolute organization of January 6th. So that's nuts. The internet found out. The Lego man was born,
That's
and here we are today. So one of my many names that you can call me is also Lego man, and
there's a
that's
joke in there somewhere, but it's inappropriate for this podcast. Okay.
yeah. After the podcast, for sure.
But that is just man, I have so many questions. First of all, do you ever think in your brain when this is going on? Because this is what I think. I think of the auto pen being in charge and the
Oh
auto
yeah,
pen dressed up as the president and just being like, "Go," like a little cartoon, like, "Go arrest the man with the Legos." Like, you just have to think
yeah.
about the insanity and the incompetency of these officers in a Democratic administration that thought that that was evidence, and that
Yeah,
was
well,
evidence worthy of prosecution.
oh, I agree, and I think that's ultimately why it says in Proverbs that evil will slay the wicked, because evil is stupid. It takes a lot of focus and discipline to be good, and evil is only focused on what it can see very short-sightedly. And if you get in the way of that, there's an element of enslavement. This is another thing that I noticed when I was watching Lord of the Rings again for the time, but as an adult in theaters, was I was noticing that there's so many tiers of enslavement within evil. And you have all these disgusting creatures all whipping each other, all yelling at each other, all screaming at each other, and everyone's afraid of each other. And they're trying to attack, Christendom, in Lord of the Rings, it's humans and men has to unite and take a stand against them. But I was realizing, I was like, man, Tolkien hit it on the head. And so did Peter Jackson for incorporating that in the movies, is that these different tiers of enslavement within evil, and none of them can think beyond their mission.
Yeah.
That they've been given from somebody else. And so that's why evil slays itself. And that's why evil slays the wicked, is because it's stupid. It takes a lot of time in order to, set up a cathedral. And if you notice anything that evil has overtaken, it's only, a counterfeit of what good had already created every
Yeah.
single time. And again, something else that, they incorporated in the Lord of the Rings. But the reason why I say that is because while I was going through all this, it was hard for me not to think that this feels like I'm in a movie. But then I also remember that God is the author and the finisher of our faith. And so if my life is starting to feel like a movie or a biblical story, for example, I must act accordingly. And I realized that I have a little bit in common with Paul. I have a little bit in common with Joseph. I have a little bit in common with Job and Jonah, because everything's been taken from me. My life has been torn to shreds. So many people have walked out on me and written me off. And whether it's girlfriends from the life past, or my father, my brother, totally have cut ties. And so
You're
it
kidding. I'm so
no,
sorry.
I wish I was.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the power of the media is very effective. They train the naive and unassuming and afraid population of America to hate me and to actually think that I'm a Nazi, and to actually think that I'm a domestic terrorist. And it's the same lowercase g God that's on everybody's walls. And I think that these black mirrors it is a false God. And so a lot of people are taking orders from these false gods. I mean, our pockets are on the wall or whatever. And I'm a victim of that. And so, but this is where it gets good. I'm gonna plug my book here shamelessly because I think
No,
it's
please do.
important, it's
Hey,
relevant.
that's part
It's
of why I
relevant
had
to
you on,
this.
because you need to plug the book.
That right there, is a scene when I changed the national anthem of how it's sang. Instead of just poetically singing the words "Still There" of our national anthem, you'll learn in this book, "Still There," why I screamed those lyrics. And if you listen to Justice for All, you'll hear us scream those lyrics after what I incorporated because I realize that after everything that has been taken from me, after everything that I've gone through, after how I've already tried serving my country honorably, my hope in my God and my faith that I will see these days renewed is still there. And within this book, you're going to find 41 short stories of my 3.5 years behind bars. It's a 565-page book, so it's kind of a phone book, really. But it's designed so that you could read one story a night and call it good. But it's ultimately how I ended up finding even deeper faith and more purpose in the belly of the beast. And I probably wouldn't have had I not gone through that gruesome sojourn. And so it's a story of biblical defiance. It's a story of political imprisonment, but it's a story of hope. And it's a story about how, our faith in our God and our hope that our days are going to be renewed is still there, regardless of what they threw at us. And it's actually pretty wild. So, in the production company that I've got, Lego Man Productions, an employee of mine, but also a dear friend who's also a January 6er, approached me last year and he said, "Hey, man, do you know what Lego Man means in Latin?" Which I have no idea. I know that in Greek it would mean, that I speak, which is cool because we did a lot of that and that's also what's under attack. And it's funny too because one of our major projects is a major Roman epic. We're going to replace Braveheart, we're going to replace Gladiator, we're going to replace Troy with a script that I wrote about a guy who really did live over 2,000 years ago, whose name you don't know because every government since his death has hidden him from you so that nobody stands up to tyranny the way that he actually did. Oh,
Really?
100%. Oh, yeah. And I've made a whole company to insulate that story because I know how rich it's gonna be, and we're gonna make it coincide with the 2028 presidential election so that everybody walks out of the theater and votes red. Oh, yeah. A lot of forethought here going on.
Oh, somebody's got you on the right because I'm deeply concerned about the midterms and about
Well,
2028.
he approaches me and he says, "Hey, do you know what Lego man means in Latin?" And I said, "I have no idea." "Well, you and I both believe in a God that renames men. Abram was renamed Abraham after he passed the test of faith. Jacob was renamed Israel after he wrestled with the Holy Ghost. Paul was, used to be named Saul. Come to find out, Lego man means in Latin I anoint men or I assemble men. Yeah.
Oh, that
So
is
I got
really cool.
renamed through this experience to a name that means I'm going to anoint men and assemble men. And so, what better name to give a Christian conservative film company than a name that means we're going to anoint and assemble men for whatever comes next?
That is
And that's the goal.
amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you do anything differently looking back?
There's plenty of things that I ask God for forgiveness for every day, but in terms of showing up to the Capitol when I knew that the election was stolen and trying to defend the people that were being shot at and blown up and beaten completely innocent, I wouldn't change anything that happened that day.
Yeah.
I don't have victims for what happened on January 6th. I wanted to protect people and I ultimately want to protect my country. And that's why I wanted to become a ranger at 17. And there should be no punishment for patriotism.
Am
There should be no reason to apologize for how much you love your country. Nationalism is the way that we're going to survive.
Yeah.
And, I'm an America First guy because I don't have anywhere else to call home. And so now that I've been thrust into this really weird, awkward, yet really cool and interesting storyline, I'm embracing it. And I know that I would be married to the wrong woman and I might have a family that made me miserable. And I would be looking at everyone who went to January 6th thinking I should have been there. And I will not have that problem today.
Isn't that incredible how God can take one thing and just kind of use it to reveal and to remove all that is not intended for us, or that because I deal with a lot of I've dealt with a lot of heartache and feels like promises unfulfilled or delay in promises being or prayers being answered. And
Yeah.
it was just in my devotion recently, it's just been a lot of like delay is not denial. And what's the other one? It's like God is protecting you. Like, rejection is often protection. Like that girl rejecting you, your parent, like your dad, like you don't know or we don't know. And in the moment where we're feeling just rejected and persecuted and ostracized and forgotten and
Yeah.
completely abandoned and alone, we don't know what God's plan is. And I'm not saying I'm through it, but I'm saying like even right now, like when I have all this uncertainty in my own life, and I know you
Mhm.
face that too, it's something that I think we really have to cling to is that God is revealing stuff every single day, whether we're aware of it or not, and whether we can understand or grasp it our circumstances, if we're trying to walk in the will of God and live our lives admirably and biblically speaking, there
Yeah.
is purpose in our pain. We might not always like
Yes.
it. Is my life what I thought it was gonna be? Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm so like, this morning, I was like, "Really? Really, God? Really? This is
Yeah.
what we're doing this year? Okay. Not happy, not happy. I would like to file
Right.
a complaint. Excuse me." But
Yeah.
but I don't know why God's doing certain things. I'm sure you didn't know why God was removing people from your life and you suddenly were in prison. I mean, that had to be scary and frightening, and you thinking I know originally you were sentenced to 66 months in jail, right? Which is almost 6 years. And, you know, to know that you got out, what, 3.5 years in, right?
Yeah, so I was on it's wild. The act that Trump passed while he was in president the first time, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name because that's what I used to get out. First Step Act, that's what it is. The First Step Act, he pushed through law the first time he was in president. I used to get out of prison because I cultivated all this good time. So Trump helped me out before he actually pardoned me.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was kind of wild. I mean, I have no criminal history. I have zero in disciplinary
You were
infractions.
a
Incarcerated.
ranger who deployed and was a history teacher, like, the mind is boggled that you even had
Yeah, pretty
so
wild. But I will tell you this, it was relevant to me and it can be relevant to you and it'll be relevant to all of your audiences. And it's to me, it's one of the most powerful lines in the Bible because it's an excellent form of surrender. Job 13:15, when he says, "Though you slay me, still I trust you." That is big.
Wow.
We're never asked to understand. We're asked to trust. And though we might feel like we're being filleted open wide, we have to trust that there's going to be an alternative sacrifice. We have to trust that though we're going to wrestle all night long, there's going to be a reason for this challenge. And we have to trust that regardless of the past that we've had, God can redeem that too. Just like the three men that I referenced who were renamed. And so, though he slays us, we can still trust him. It's
And
important for everybody to understand.
think you should probably just become a pastor after this, like, just go. I mean, or like, "I will hire you to come speak at these churches," that's more scripture and I think more Bible than I've seen in a lot of churches lately, so, what we're, like, going forward is I know the midterms are this year, obviously, we have 2028 coming up. Everything that you've experienced and seen, what's your hope for this year and for the foreseeable future? And what do you think we are tasked with as American citizens, like not just Christians, but as conservative and as citizens of the greatest nation on earth?
Well, I think we have to remember what made it great in the first place, which was Almighty God, which, can sound vague, but it was the obedience of God. Read the preamble of our Constitution. The responsibility, for the safeguards of liberty have always been on the shoulders of we the people. You see that bumper sticker, you see that tattoo, you see the wall art, and that's cool. But how many of those people that flaunt those things are actually willing to take the responsibility to read our founding documents, to understand right from wrong, to have a life of discipline so that when the government comes knocking, they have a resource to call upon that hasn't been seized. I mean, there's so many people that are willing to crack open a beer and watch the TV show by design, and then totally ignore what's going on within our own borders. And so I would ask that I'm hoping at this time around, more people decide to unplug from the matrix. More people decide to turn off the television screens, read books, get healthy, stop eating the things that make you temporarily happy, but then also slow you down and make you a liability, 6 months to a year after eating the garbage. I would just say, just try to live like Christ.
Yeah.
Be
Live
told the
life
truth,
well. That's what
live
this
life
show keeps
well.
coming back to is living life well. Are you living life well, America?
Because your politics are going to follow suit from that. So if you're thinking clearly, and if you've had enough discipline, because discipline equals freedom, and if you've instructed yourself on what right and wrong is, your politics are going to follow suit. And because so many counterfeits have been pushed in our face, whether it's the food, whether it's the literature, like you're talking about with Harry Potter or whatever, or whether it's actual false gods, there's so many counterfeits that people are very lost and confused. So it's our responsibility as educators, as well-read individuals, and also people that are, willing to fight for the faith to wake up as many people as possible, as often as possible and as needed, and to break it down. Like, this isn't easy, but that's the point. We are never supposed to cruise through life because that means you have no enemies and you have no destiny. When you're going through life and it feels like a fight and a roller coaster and it just sucks, first that means you've put your foot down and you're willing to stand on something, and that's awesome. But a life without enemies is a life unfulfilled. And that's the point. You're not supposed to go through life casually. You're supposed to come in like barely, alive and kicking and screaming like a plucked chicken when this is all over with, because that's how you feel the highs and lows. The man in the arena, that's how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to be spectators. We're supposed to be in the ring. And if I can challenge anyone in your audience to decide this is the year that I'm going to get in the ring, that's how you save this country. And that's actually how you go to heaven.
In the words of Lyndon B. Johnson, who I didn't love, but he did say this, and he said, "A free society is not a spectator sport." The
Yeah.
truth. Well, would you wanna tell everyone where they can find you and follow you
Sure.
and buy your book?
Thank you very much. Well, yeah. So if you go on Amazon, type in "Still There" or "One Question Remains," you'll be able to find it. And then if you were to go on legomanproductions.com with two G's, because I don't want to get sued and have more court battles, you'll find the website. And then you'll also find our Instagrams and socials. Instagram, Legoman Productions. And then I think Twitter is like Legoman Films or something like that. But yeah, we try to let everybody know what we're doing, and we're climbing up to Mount Doom. We're gonna put this ring in the fire. That's our job, and we're
Yeah,
gonna
we
save
are.
this country.
Let's melt that evil thing. Let's get it done. But I just wanna
That's
say thank
right.
you so much for coming on the show, for being so insightful, so well read, and just is such an excellent communicator on all levels, and I hope to have you back on again. We have to do, like, a midterm checkup and see what's going on and what's happened.
I love that.
Yeah, it'd be great, but genuinely, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing, and I hope to see you again soon. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Tiffany Marie Brandon Show. Until next time, I'll be nicer if you'll be smarter.